Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. As ever, all you see here is for sale. Names, references, and where available, prices in the description below. And to buy anything or inquire about prices not listed, please reach out to me directly, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. And we are in acquisition mode, looking to add to our inventory. I want you to supply me one watch, an entire collection, no upper limit on value. Reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com to sell your watch. Let's jump straight in with a big piece. In fact, let's jump straight in with a classic piece. A giant watch by the standards of 1969. This is a Moonwatch, the much-loved sapphire sandwich. Now, a lot of Moonwatches seem to be on straps, which is natural, and it would be how they are worn in space, albeit on Velcro. But to see a Moonwatch on a bracelet, it adds a little bit of upscale refinement. 42 millimeters in stainless steel, the watch is no nonsense, still issued by NASA and used even for extravehicular or spacewalks. It's a versatile timepiece that's still tank tough. Throw it on the wrist. It's a handsome, beautifully balanced watch. For a timepiece that wasn't expressly designed with aesthetics first and foremost, it looks fantastic. It hasn't aged a day, and with the addition of a sapphire crystal instead of the standard Hesalite, this is a watch that's actually well suited to terra firma. Now, the timepiece wears easily on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist. You can see it's a bit broader across the wrist. As ever, it includes full stainless steel construction of bracelet and case, and you can see there are small polished intermediates that give this bracelet a little bit of a semi-dressy appearance. You've got a deploying clasp, latest generation spec, so milled out solid swing arm twin trigger. It's a lot like the clasp we've seen on the Speedmaster Diver 300s for years. As you can see, there's a lovely bubble box section sapphire designed to evoke the plexiglass, or Hesalite I should say, that's still used on the spacefaring versions. And then on the reverse side you see caliber 1863. It's still based on the Lemania 1873 a Bausch, which is the 3-register version, and it's still a lateral clutch cam chronograph, but here's the thing, it is a gorgeous looking movement, and it's dressed up here as you get a higher quality of beveling on the bridges, and also you get a metal rather than Delrin chronograph brake, so it looks better than its Moonwatch counterpart, even though they are functionally identical. Manual wind, 21.6 beat rate, a cam system with a lateral clutch, 48-hour power reserve, all of this 50 meters water resistant. And I have to say that in particular, the beveling on these is awesome. It looks mirrored, shiny, rounded, and smooth. If I didn't know that this is done at an incredibly high level by Lemania and Omega in an industrial fashion, I would have sworn that these were hand-beveled bridges. They're that good. Now let's talk about a watch that comes from a brand that is known for watchmaking. This is a model, let me wind it up a little bit here. This is a model, the Zenith El Primero, that includes an absolutely bonkers foutrion, a timepiece with 2 movements in one case. You can actually see both balances and both escapements. The El Primero beats away at 10 beats per second, and then the second 360,000 vibration per hour escapement beats away at 100 beats per second. They have 2 separate power reserves. The El Primero can be manually wound, but it's also automatically wound. The chronograph, which has a 50-minute power reserve versus 50 hours for the time, that chronograph must be manually wound, which is why there is a power reserve indicator up at 12 o'clock for the chronograph. When you turn it over, you can see it's an impressive looking movement with a combination of blue bridges and winding masts and nickel anthracite base. Let me do my best to try to get a little bit more light in there. It is a certified chronometer, so it has a COSC certification. It pivots on 53 joules. This is a copious importation of Tag Heuer caliber 360 technology, but it works well. It also creates a first for the El Primero, unidirectional winding and a hacking second system, something previous El Primero watches did not include. It also has a distinctive sound to it. I'm going to hold it up to the microphone. Maybe you can hear it. It sounds a little bit like an old Accutron. Now, all of this is loomed, waterproof to 100 meters, and mounted on a rarely seen integrated bracelet. 44 millimeters, it doesn't feel that large. It's only about 49.5 millimeters lug to lug and 14.6 millimeters thick, so while it's not thin, all in grade 5 titanium and feather light with a cushion case profile, it does wear well on a smaller wrist. It looks the business, it feels great, and of course it comes from a truly awesome manufacturer. Here's a watch from an awesome, albeit much smaller manufacturer. Now this is the boutique edition of my favorite FP Journe. This is the Chronomet Optimum 42 millimeters boutique edition. That means it can only be purchased through FP Journe boutiques, and that is the only way to get this combination of black dial and red gold case. Now this watch has one more enhancement in its favor, which is the 42 millimeter case. And while I generally prefer the smaller Journe watches, not so with the Chronomet Optimum. It has an intricate, complex, and in 40 millimeters, a crowded dial. It breathes, opens up, and has better overall proportions in the 42 millimeter case. Now we'll get close and take a look at some of the features. You can see there's a power reserve indicator. The power reserve is 70 hours, but for approximately 45 of the 70 hours, the remontoire d'égalité, the 1 second sort of buffer between the barrel and the escapement, will keep the balance amplitude absolutely static. You will not lose any balance amplitude for the first 45 hours of mainspring wind. Now you can see it's the same linear spring system that's used in the tourbillon souverain, and there's a deadbeat mechanism on the reverse side and a sweep second system on the dial side. So with this remontoire, the linear spring in titanium, you can see it just below the chapter ring, or I should say the inner bezel for the deadbeat, but it meets out 1 second bursts of energy from the twin mainspring barrels to the escapement, and there's a lot going on here. F.P. Journe describes this as the most accurate mechanical watch he knows how to make. So you have 2 barrels for more even torque across the full power reserve than you would get in a standard single barrel. You have the remontoire system acting as a buffer so that the balance gets the same amount of energy through 45 hours. It will always be the same amount of energy each second. It won't be dependent on barrel energy. Then you have a double direct impulse system with unlubricated individual wheels that directly impulse the balance, each one only in its direction of rotation back and forth, so there is no Swiss lever. And then you get an overcoil hairspring, something rarely used on Journe watches, that allows it to beat concentrically in any orientation with respect to gravity. Finally, there is 6 position adjustment, not the chronometer standard of 5, and it does include a free sprung balance. There's also a lovely black polished cap on the stud holder, and the standard of finish you get here is a little bit higher than with a standard Journe watch. In particular, you can also see that on the, as you can see, the steel cock for part of the train of the remontoire, the cap of the stud holder, and when you turn the watch over, you can see the upper side cock for the remontoire system is also black polished, and that's just not something you see too often on Journe watches. They tend to be a combination of manual and machine finish with very little black polish. This watch has quite a bit of it. On my wrist, 16 centimeters circumference, it's 9.8 millimeters thick, 42 millimeters wide, and has a nice broad saucer-like look. Now, let's switch back to something utilitarian and get another Omega. But this is one of my favorites. I think this is my favorite version of the current Diver 300 meter. You have the lovely nickel chrome dial, which is actually made of ceramic, and then it's coated in this chrome metallic material. Blue indices and hands. You have a ceramic bezel insert with cold enamel fill. All of this since 2018, 42 millimeters in diameter. And no, it's not a no-date dial. The date is just hiding down at 6 o'clock, where it moved from 3 o'clock back in 2018. The timepiece wears easily on a smaller wrist, as it's really not that broad across the wrist. It's 50 millimeters, but it's a compact 50 millimeters. It feels like it could wear well on a wrist as small as 14 centimeters circumference. Still a 300 meter diver. A change for 2018 was the arrival of this conical helium escape valve. It can now be opened during the dive, so if you're a saturation diver and you need that feature, you can open it up after the fact. The reverse side of the watch, caliber 8800, 55-hour power reserve, automatic winding, tri-level coaxial, master chronometer, amagnetic, free sprung with a full balance bridge, and this one includes hacking seconds and a quick set date. So it's an amagnetic watch, it is a shock-resistant watch, it is a water-resistant watch. It puts it all together, real 42 millimeters in stainless steel. But we're not done yet. Another Geneva high horology brand, considerably larger than F.P. Journe, but when we're talking this kind of watch, production really isn't that much higher, because this Patek Philippe 5370P is an application piece to be sold on approval from Terry Stern exclusively. 41 millimeters in platinum with a black Grand Faux enamel dial. This is a model that debuted to great acclaim back in 2015. It's a 41 millimeter watch, but you can see it is still pretty slim in profile at about 13.1 millimeters. The case band is fascinating. Patek case construction keeps getting more and more sophisticated, and you can see that in the double finish with the satin in the inner relieved channel and then outboard the polish. You'll also note the use of white gold cabochon at the end of the lug profiles. There's a diamond between the lugs because this is a platinum Patek of modern generation, and then you turn it all over. By the way, a detail to note and love, the fact that there are hand-polished and hand-laid white gold Breguet Arabic numerals on this Grand Faux enamel black tachymeter dial. Also, take a look, it's a loomed watch. There are loomed hands. Turn the watch over, and this is where the action really happens. Based on the 29535, It's a movement with a 65-hour manual wind power reserve, and as you can see, the split-second mechanism of this 5370p rattrapant features a forest of small and yet hand-finished springs. There's a pincer system at the center with a decoupler so that when the rattrapant seconds hand is not in action, the whole system doesn't drag. So that decoupler is a feature you'll find on only a few ultra high-end split-second chronographs from the likes of Patek and Lange. Now you can see there are two separate column wheels. There is one that is traditional, and that operates the primary lateral clutch, and then there's a second hidden within this labyrinth of polished steel, and that actuates the system for the rattrapant trigger. Now, let's turn the watch over, demonstrate. Can you hear that? That is as crisp as a column wheel gets. And at Patek Philippe, lateral clutch chronographs are considered to be more premium than the vertical clutch chronographs, which is one of the reasons only the high-end Patek watchmakers are allowed to work on the lateral clutch chronographs. 65-hour power reserve, free sprung balance, 6-position adjustment. As you can see, everything is achingly gorgeous in finish. I don't need to wax lyrical because you can see for yourself that this is best in the world type stuff. Now, when you pull the crown out, note there is hacking seconds, so this is a modern Patek movement. It does have that feature. There's also a full matching platinum deploying clasp, and when you throw the watch on the wrist, super comfortable, nicely shaped. You can see the arc of the lugs is well matched to a small wrist, so though this is a 41 and thus fairly large by Patek dress watch standards, nevertheless, I could wear it well. It sits low enough to cuff, and it's a very comfortable case form. All right. Two from Rolex, starting with the Rolex Daytona, as it was released in 2016. You can see that this Daytona is a different pace from the black dial, black ceramic bezel that I had last week. And a lot of folks believe that this is the more popular variant. I see more of these than the black dial, and while Rolex doesn't actually introduce any production figures to the market, I can just tell by the frequency that I see this dial that it is the market's preferred option. It gives you more contrast, there's no doubt about that, and frankly it also makes the registers a little bit easier to read because of the black hands on the white base. Now pop it open, you can see it's still the oyster clasp, 40 millimeters in diameter, 12.4 millimeters thick, and since 2016 you have that black ceramic bezel. It's a sporty look, and the contrasting colors make for a good deal of drama on the wrist. It's elegant enough to be your dress watch, but it's also tough enough, being anti-magnetic, 100 meters water resistant, and shock resistant. It could be your sports watch too. Plenty of lume, there's no doubt about that. We'll do a lume shot with all these sports watches we've just had up on the counter in the last few minutes. It's got a 3-day power reserve, a vertical clutch, and a column wheel, and the architecture of the movement is much like you'll find on the other sports watches, with a free sprung balance adjusted by micro Stella nuts, and then a full balance bridge, so it is a very tough movement. It was also the first Rolex movement to use a ball bearing instead of a jeweled staff for the rotor, so that made it a little bit tougher than previous jeweled staff movements like the 3135. Let's talk about a watch that came out in 2018. This was the first ever rose gold and stainless steel two-tone GMT. In fact, that year brought us the first ever rose gold GMT and our first ever two-tone rose gold and steel GMT. Now the watch has a 70-hour power reserve, so it's got the upgraded movement, the 3285. Pop it open. You can see internal to the clasp on both of these Rolex watches, you have the Easy Link system, which is 5 millimeters of tool-free adjustment. And again, both of them feature a few divots drilled inside the clasp. I don't know how well you can see those, but there are divots drilled inside the clasp that allow you to change the anchoring point of the bracelet for fine tuning. Throw it on the wrist, and although it's technically a 40 like the Daytona, it does feel bigger. That's kind of the nature of the super case. Now, Rolex just in the last week has started to pare down the lugs of the sub in order to minimize the profiling of the squared off and sheer super case. But the GMT's redesign didn't bring a sea change in case design, meaning today, as of, well, the first week of August, the GMT now looks a little bit chunkier and more butch than the sub, which has pared down its lugs. Of course, being a GMT, you just saw me operating the 12-hour hand independently. There's that 24-hour second time zone. If you set that to Greenwich Mean Time, you can use this rose gold ceramic inlaid bezel to offset using the GMT offset of your port or airport of destination, and you can temporarily find 3 time zones on the watch. Like the Daytona, it's a chronometer. Like the Daytona, it has 100 meters of water resistance, and there really is a lot to love about this watch. So if you want something that's just a little bit warmer than austere steel, this is a great way to go. And also, it gives you that sporty look with the oyster bracelet that it can't get with the Jubilee. So this is a watch that has a very specific look, feel, ambiance, and character, and for a lot of folks, that's going to be a perfect match. Okay, let's try to do some Lume Shots here. My Zin Easy M1. Okay, that's cheating. Right here you can see I have the Moonwatch. You can see that loomed chronograph seconds hand. Right here you can see I have the GMT Master. Right here we have the Seamaster Diver 300 meter, and you can see that the minute hand and the bezel pearl are green to make it easier to locate them. And then here we have the Rolex Daytona. The Patek 5370 is also loomed, but it's not remarkable enough to waste your time. Let's talk about a watch that probably represents the best 42mm Royal Oak Offshore limited edition. Launched at the 2010 Japanese Grand Prix, this is the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore Yarno Truly, a timepiece that gives you just about everything you could want. 42mm, it features the forged carbon case, a 500-piece limited edition. You have a combination of titanium hardware for the intermediate plots, and you can see there is a titanium caseback, titanium crown and pusher, but the bezel is not titanium, it is cermet. It's a hybrid of metal and ceramic that gives you the hardness of ceramic and the scratch resistance, also the lightness of aluminum and the resistance to fracturing or shattering that you expect from metal. So it's really the best of ceramic and metal, difficult to create, difficult to finish, and rarely seen on AP watches. It gives this watch an extra measure of durability and a cool grayscale aesthetic. So to recap, forged carbon case, curated up to 450 degrees, titanium hardware, cermet bezel, gray mega tapisserie dial, red accents, and this was one of the first 42mm Royal Oak Offshores to have a display caseback, and you can see why. It's a good looking movement. 55 hours power reserve, automatic winding, quick set, stop seconds, vertical clutch chronograph module, free sprung with a full balance bridge and a Gyromax style balance. This is the caliber 3126, and it has a 3840 Dubois de Praz vertical clutch module on the other side. You can see Yarno's own signature. He had his best days at Renault Sport. And the timepiece, to which he lends his name, is an awesome looking piece that's regarded on par with the Schumachers and the Rubens Barrichello and Montoya series as the absolute best of the Royal Oak Offshore limited editions. Now it comes on this lovely AP diver strap. It's 100 meters water resistant, so with the rubber strap and the 100-meter case, you can take this one right into the pool. The fact that it has that awesome looking cermet bezel means that it's also going to block a lot of the scratches and scuffs that generally disfigure Royal Oaks and Offshores. I would describe it as wearing better than a standard Offshore because it's very light in cermet, titanium, and forged carbon, and then it has this super flexible diver style strap, so even if you've got that little wrist of about 14 centimeters, this is a rare Offshore that I'm going to say is suitable for your wrist size, and one of the best ever. I can't believe it's been 10 years already since the Yarno Truly. Okay, from Les Brassus to northern Japan and Grand Seiko. This is a watch that came out last year, and frankly, I don't know how I missed it in the spring, but the first one I saw was in November at the Dubai airport. It's the SPGA 407, better known as the Skyflake, just over 40mm in diameter. It's a spring drive automatic that features a remarkable blue tinted variant of the much loved Snowflake dial, and the Snowflake nickname has been bestowed by the manufacturer itself. It's not one of those cutesy collector terms like you'll find in the Rolex world. They truly designed the bezel, or I should say the dial, to look like the blown snowdrifts outside the northern Japan watchmaking studios. What you have here is a lovely blue tint. It does look sky blue, and the real attraction of a Grand Seiko watch, often missed, is not just the dial base, but the dial furniture, like the hands and the indices. You can see all of them use gem-like faceting. That's wrought by manual finishing against diamond-tipped milling tools. There are artisans at Grand Seiko who just create these little parts, and you can see it's been rendered on the hands as well, which are mirror polished on their top with blade-like facets equally finished. The dial furniture on a Grand Seiko is handcrafted and beautiful in its own right. The watch has a 3-day power reserve. Remarkably, for a dress-style watch, you can see it also has 100 meters of water resistance. You can see the spring drive system on the reverse side, a unidirectional governing wheel, no batteries, no capacitors, no motors. All the energy is either kinetic, spring, or in a brief induced electrical current spurt, there is a current that wakes up a quartz oscillator, and that's the only electronics in the watch. But the motion of the governing wheel wakes up that quartz oscillator. The quartz oscillator then uses a back EMF or electromagnetic force to break the governing wheel. As a result, it can run slower or faster as necessary, but the seconds hand always sweeps in a completely smooth fashion. There's a quick set, hacking seconds, there's a power reserve, and this watch, of course, with a watchmaker-made, watchmaker-tuned, and when the time comes, watchmaker-serviced movement that is designed to last not just the life of the owner, but the life of the watch several human lifetimes. It does use the Zaratsu tin plate black polish, of which you've probably heard a great deal online. It is a tin plate polishing against the surface to be milled, executed with a Zalitz machine. The artisans who do this take about 3 years to learn the technique, and this optically smooth mirrored finish is equivalent to what you'll see on the black polished components, for example, of the Patek or the Journe we saw earlier. But whereas the Swiss execute this technique on small surfaces, Grand Seiko does it on watch-sized components. Full cases, truly exceptional, a hand-finished watch with unrivaled technology, accurate to plus or minus 15 seconds a month. Now let's talk about my favorite independent. De Bethune of Lauberson, Switzerland makes 150 watches a year, and under watchmaker Denis Flageolet, and these days CEO Pierre Jacques, the company crafts a broad range of watches in many styles. This is the DB25 Power Reserve, and you're going to note it doesn't feature the floating lugs of the DB28. It's a more conventional case shape, 44 millimeters in red gold. You can see on my wrist it wears broad and flat. It's 11.4 millimeters thick, so it is quite low. It's about a millimeter thinner than the Daytona. You can also see that the dial, which De Bethune makes in-house along with the case, features real rose lathe guilloche. This is not the stamped kind. This is the kind that is reductively imposed on the dial with a lovely billowing rayon or radial pattern cut into the dial base. Now, if you look closely, you can see that the toroidal hour track, which is printed in blue, does actually step up above the center dial, giving another plane of focus and 3 dimensions. The hands have been fired blue, as is the practice at De Bethune, and just as they make their dial and case, they make their movement. This is the caliber 2024, and it was originally crafted back in 2006 with a number of patented elements. Automatic winding, it's one of the few that De Bethune offers, as most of their watches are hand wound. There's a platinum mass outboard, a titanium rotor, and a unique feature patented back in 2006. It is a shock protection system that has radially arrayed linear springs that include little jewels to reduce friction. So in the case of shock, these little springs keep the rotor located and prevent it from torquing in a fashion that is unnatural. It's designed to turn. It is not designed to be laterally displaced. And that shock protection system pairs with the triple parachute system for the balance. Full balance bridge, but note shock protection on each side, 2 shock protection springs, and then you also have Inca block for the balance staff. You'll also note a non-annular, that is cruciform balance wheel, their own patent, like the twin self-adjusting barrels, the shock protection system for the rotor, the hairspring, the escape wheel, the shock protection, and the balance, all of this patented. You can see that the balance is a combination of platinum masses outboard and then a fired blue titanium, I'm not going to call it a ring, but cruciform primary carriage for the masses. This reduces aerodynamic resistance, which matters when you're beating at 28,800 vibrations per hour for years on end, and it also allows the mass to be localized in the rim of the balance for maximum effect. The timepiece has a 6-day automatic winding power reserve, and as you can see, there is a power reserve indicator on the dial side. A little bit more restrained than your typical De Bethune watch, but just as technically adept. If you want the truly iconic de Bethune watch, though, you want the DB28, and this is the original DB28 right here, the model that won the Aiguille d'Or at the 2011 GPHG, the grand prize, effectively, at the Oscars of watchmaking, and this was Best Picture. It's 42.7 millimeters in diameter, and it's actually under 12 millimeters thick, so it's a thin watch, but it's broad and dramatic with a polished grade 5 titanium case that's more scratch-resistant than steel, but also lighter than steel. It features those signature floating lugs, and you can see how they change their geometry. It's a bullhead winder, by the way, but they change their geometry to fit your wrist. Now, when you get down to the base of the dial, you can see that there is a spherical moon phase, 1/2 white palladium, 1/2 blued steel. It need be adjusted only once every 122 years. Now, the balance, this is another separate patented balance design by de Bethune. I believe this is their 2010 balance design. It has a full silicon disc, and then outboard you can see all of the heavy metal mass has been located right to the edge of the rim. You can better see that hairspring I mentioned earlier. It's 2 pieces formed by hand in-house, and because of that unconventional bi-element clamped design where 2 pieces are clamped together, it beats concentrically like an overcoil, but it doesn't have the shock susceptibility of an overcoil. You can see the 2 barrels. The power reserve is peeking out from underneath the roughly 2 o'clock position. That's a stub power reserve. If you want a more conventional one, there's a larger power reserve indicator on the caseback. 6 days manual wind, and as you can see, fantastically finished in the traditional sense, albeit with untraditional design. There are Côte de Bethune across the bridges, and if you look closely, you can see that they are ridged. That is, the dark ridge is facing outward on both sides. That's because to craft the 2 different sides of the bridges and the base plate, de Bethune artisans reverse the direction of the abrasive wheel that lays down the stripes. Now you can see at center there is a black polished upper bridge brace that acts as the mounting point for the individual fired blue titanium shock protection springs. So you're getting a lot of traditional finish, albeit in very untraditional design. There is a polished titanium ring outboard with individual applique globes of titanium acting as the hour indices, and then you can see fired blue modified skeleton breguet hands at center. A truly spectacular watch. I'm going to throw it on my wrist, and you can see just how flat this watch really is. It wears quite flush. It's not excessively broad, as the lugs will vary in order to fit your wrist, and it is very light, being primarily composed of titanium, sapphire, and air. This is a landmark watch from one of the great brands in modern independent horology. If you're into Journe, you need to know about de Bethune. This is, frankly, possibly the most innovative, engineering-intensive brand that you can buy at any price. No company spends more relative to its volume of watches on engineering and pure science R&D than does de Bethune. This is a group brand, but I like to think it acts as an independent. Glashütte Original of Saxony perhaps is the company Swatch Group forgot it owned, because the way the watches are designed, engineered, and marketed is very offbeat and under the radar for a major group brand. They also create every part of the watch, which is impressive. As you can see, they're now making their own dials in Pforzheim, and while the cases, I should mention, are still provided by suppliers, the dials are executed in-house along with the movement, and this is a glorious silver matte varnished dial, so while it looks like it might be an opaline anodized metallic or galvanized metallic, it's actually a lovely matte rusticated roughed lacquer that has a wonderful pebbly texture across its surface. The nice thing about the caliber 37 used here is that it gives you a lot of features. You get the double-digit date, you got a power reserve indicator, it'll run for 70 hours, there's an indicator hidden in the constant seconds. It is a flyback chronograph stock from the factory, and this 42mm red gold case serves as a wonderful showcase, pun intended, for the movement. Now, one of the features I love about this watch is that there's a little rocker on the caseback, and you can see where it says on and off. I've never seen a watch with a display caseback that includes an internal indicator that suggests whether you are running or not running the chronograph. You would ordinarily only see that indicator when the watch is off the wrist. A playful touch from the usual sobriety of German watch design. Is it necessary? No. Is it fun? Absolutely. It is a column wheel design with a very crisp actuation. And as you can see, there is no jump or stagger to the actuation of the chronograph seconds hand. full deploying clasp, which by itself weighs almost as much as some ultra-thin watches I've encountered. This is a modern chronograph caliber that was introduced back in 2013 by Geo, and this Senator Panadate chrono is a truly spectacular piece that gives you a lot of the German style that you expect from a Lange und Söhne, Lang und Heine, or Moritz Grossmann, albeit with a very different price proposition, as these are consistently undervalued by the market, and pre-owned they sell at a huge discount versus new retail, and that's really to your advantage as a buyer, because what you're getting is artisanal German watchmaking at the highest level with impressive technical refinement. Independent brands really have their day on today's show, and this is one of my favorites. They started selling their first watches back in 2011. This is HYT, and you're looking at the HYT H1 Titanium Bronze. Don't let the size fool you. At 48.8 millimeters, you might think it's absolutely huge, but it wears nothing like an Hublot King Power. The signature of this brand is its use of a fluid display. There are actually two fluids. They're immiscible, so they can't mix. There's a meniscus where they meet. One is actually clear, one is green here. The two bellows systems act as reservoirs. They're driven by a mechanical cam, which is advanced by a conventional 65-hour manual wind Swiss lever movement. So it is traditional watchmaking on the reverse side. The case itself may look bronze, but it's actually a special titanium treatment, so it's pretty light for its size. Now watch this. It's technically a regulator because you have your seconds, your minutes, and your hours. And it's a retrograde because when the green fluid reaches the end of its travel, it jumps back remarkably quickly to begin its next trek around the dial. There is a power reserve indicator up at about, let's call that 230, and then the watch is loomed. I'm going to do my best to show you a lume shot of this watch, but first let's throw it on the wrist. Oops, zoom in a little bit too much. I like this brand a lot. They're friendly folks. They make truly innovative products. Is this the most conventional and practical way to tell time? But no, if you cared about that, you'd just look at your phone. This is what mechanical watchmaking is all about. A sense of wonder, a sense of, I would say, childish glee. And that's exactly what I get when I look at this watch. You'll also note the depth of the dial is outstanding. Let's lume this one up. As you can see, it is surprisingly loomed. For a timepiece that is primarily about reading a fluid scale, there is an awful lot going on after the lights go down. Ah, Moser, how do I love thee, many ways. This is the only independent brand that competes for my heart alongside de Bethune, as these guys consistently build some of the most beautiful, distinctive, and yes, to use their tagline, rare Swiss watches. They make 1,500 pieces a year out of Schaffhausen, and they're impressive in that they build their movements, yes, but also small parts like escapements, balances, and hairsprings. This is the Venturer Small Seconds Purity Dial, and you can see why. What they like to call their funky blue with a fume fade features minimal calibration, instrumentation, printing of no kind appears on this dial, and that is remarkably discreet, as branding from some manufacturers tends to take the form of a tome on the dial. This watch is all about style. You know who made it. No branding or marquee is necessary. And because Moser likes to say more than 90% of their watches are made in Switzerland, that's why they don't use Swiss made on the dial. They feel that 60% by law is a joke and they don't want to participate. Now this watch is easy to wear at about 39 millimeters in white gold. It's dramatic on the wrist, but it has a nice weight to it thanks to the precious metal. You can see that there's a little bit of a warmth to white gold that you don't get with platinum, and just to demonstrate how evident that is when you put them side by side, here you can see that the white gold it's a little bit yellower, it's a little bit warmer, it's more obviously related to gold than the ultra white profile of platinum, and that's the 5370 that you just saw there. Moser's cases are gorgeous. They always have relieved lugs, and that's true even on the Pioneers, but the lovely recess here, black polished and concave like a bowl with a curved mirror. That concave profile does incredible things with light. It's almost like it's on fire as you move it through the light. The attention to detail on these watches is superb, and that continues right down to the strap, which is made of kudu. Keep me streaming, open a different window. I know I had to look it up too because I had no visual reference for what that animal looked like. The movement, caliber 232, manual wind, 3-day power reserve. Note how they hit the power reserve indicator on the back. So they've hidden the power reserve indicator to keep the dial clean. And in case you're wondering, yes, there is a hacking or stop seconds function. The movement has that 3-day power reserve and it beats away at a stately 18,000 vibrations per hour. Important to note that it includes a full balance bridge with a free sprung index. It also has, if you look very carefully, a Leica etched escape wheel, which is an impressive technical refinement as it allows for fantastic precision. Double crested cotillon. Note how there are 2 waves narrowly spaced where the waves actually meet. This is distinctive of Moser and it's something that only they do. All of the screw heads are black polished and you can see there's a nice chamfer on the edge of the bridges. That's mechanically applied on this model, but it's also neat and regular across right down to the balance bridge. Being free sprung with a full bridge, it is also a quite tough watch, so not a sports watch, but fairly shock resistant, and it uses a handmade overcoil hairspring for concentric beating in any orientation, and again, 3-day power reserve. Look at that dial. Okay, this is a watch that means a lot to me. Part of the IWC Jubilee collection, 150 years, for 2018, this is the tribute to Paul Weber. It's not part of any other collection. It's not a Portofino, it's not a Portuguese, it's not a Pilot. This is a timepiece that is 45 millimeters in diameter, but only 12.2 millimeters thick, and it's designed to look essentially like a Joseph Paul Weber designed IWC pocket watch from the late 19th century. Now, Paul Weber was an Austrian watchmaker who designed a jump hour and minute system back in the late 19th century. He would have designed the basic mechanism, IWC would have adapted it and encased it up, and those were all pocket watches. This gives you that in a wristwatch format with a 12-layer hand-laid lacquer dial that is designed to look like the bottomless glossy enamel of those vintage pocket watches. So you have layers of blue and then you have layers of clear, and it is a laborious hours-long process by which 12 layers are added to ultimately create the appearance of a wet paint surface that is glossy and endless, almost as though you could plunge your finger into it. Now, I know you want to see how this thing works, so I'm going to cycle it through its operation. Note you can quick set it in both directions, and the caliber, which has a 60-hour power reserve, is technically impressive. The 94200 was developed just for this watch. It's big, it fills the case back, and as you can see, it couples 2 separate mainspring barrels, and because the seconds and the minutes aren't actually driven by the same power source, there is a system at the center, a sort of secondary escapement, that will couple the jump of the seconds and the minutes and synchronize them even though they're operated by 2 separate drivetrains. Now, whereas the original Zeitwerk had a 36-hour manual wind power reserve, this has a 60-hour power reserve right there, which is technically impressive given the amount of energy needed to jump the system. It also features an overcoil hairspring on a free-sprung balance and chronometer-style 5-position adjustment. Let's throw this one on the wrist. It's big, broad, but doesn't wear long across the wrist, as it's essentially a 45 millimeter diameter circle. The lugs, which I would compare to a wire lug radium, are barely there. They drape the watch over the end of the wrist, and if I'm going to be frank, I would recommend it for a wrist as small as 14 centimeters circumference, because it wears light, it wears thin, it wears comfortable, and big is the look. It's supposed to look like a pocket watch on your wrist. Of course, there's a full steel deployment to match, and this watch is a limited edition. As you can see, edition 150 years. And this is 1 out of 500 made in steel. The steel one with the blue dial was the one to have. Italian-made Santoni leather strap, the OEM supplier to IWC for its more upscale references. Now this is a golden oldie from IWC. Calendar System by Kurt Klaus. Chronograph by Vallee de Joux. Minute Repeater Module by Audemars Piguet Renault Papi, back when they were still just Renault Papi. Design by Hanno Bircher. 42 millimeters in platinum. This is the IWC 3770 Grand Complication. Each year, 50 would be made in each metal, and this example in platinum was number 2 of 50 for 1995. As you see here, with a few changes to the hands, the watch was made from 1990 to 2010, and it was always the flagship of IWC. 42 millimeters, it is a true Grand Complication. Note some of the refinements, including a gloss lacquer white dial, a moon phase disc made of aventurine. It's bottomless, glossy, and glorious. It features a chronograph. It also features a minute repeater. It also features the Kurt Klaus perpetual calendar system. So let me make sure we're not in the middle of the danger zone here. It does feature a screw-down crown to prevent you from doing anything stupid while the minute repeater is in action. But the watch includes a sequential Kurt Klaus designed IWC calendar system that first debuted back in 1985, and it allows you to set the watch as you would a quick set on a conventional Rolex Datejust. Everything, day, date, month, moon phase, year, all of that moves in sync. So all you need to do is set the correct date for the year you're in and you're good. The watch also has the extraordinary capability to keep track of the year, the decade, the century, and the millennium. So this is a very comprehensive perpetual calendar system, and the moon phase and aventurine gives it a depth and a luster and a glorious artisanal beauty that is rare on IWC watches, which tend to be mass-produced. Throw it on the wrist. This is one of my favorite IWC references. Let me show you that aventurine before I throw it on my wrist. As a really good looking dial. Also note the gold chapter rings for the individual registers. It has a nice cruciform symmetry because of the 4 registers spaced out equally on the dial. This is one of my favorite IWC watches and one of my favorite watches, period. It's short across the wrist and compact. If you can't wear the gargantuan grand complications built by many other manufacturers, including today IWC, then the old 42mm is the way to go. The movement started life as a Vallee de Joux 7750, but after Renault Papi added the minute repeater, Kurt Klaus added the perpetual calendar, and IWC regulated it, replaced the power source, the train, and the regulator with the balance and hairspring of their own choosing. Well, frankly, it's all IWC as you go from 25 joules in the standard 7750 to 75 joules in the movement as modified. Now, because this is a minute repeater, and I've said more than enough, let's let this watch speak for itself. If you want to impress your friends with your minute repeater, then you want to set the watch to 12:59. A lot of folks make the mistake of setting the watch to 11:59, but the thing to do is to set it to 12:59, and I always try to get as close as I can. Sometimes I come up a little short or I overshoot, but let's have a listen. My unbroken record continues. 42mm in platinum, a true grand complication, and an automatic winding one at that. If you like the watches you see here, reach out to me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Buy, trade, sell, and we are acquiring. If you have any of these watches, we're willing to double up or triple up. We are buying and paying top dollar. To sell, reach out to me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Stay safe, have fun, time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.